protect what we love. That seems to be a good place to start. So why aren't we protecting the earth? I think it's because we've forgotten that we love the world. And that's what I'm interested in devoting my work to, is how do we find our way back to that space where not only we in this room, but we collectively, we humanity, remember what we love and we feel it deeply enough to change our behavior. And coming out of denial and facing the horrors of the world is actually a much more complicated process than I thought. So let's just start with some images that are about that. So how do we face the realities of our world? How do we comprehend these enormous problems? So these are brown paper supermarket bags. There's lots of them all stacked up. And we're slowly zooming back from a very large-scale conceptual artwork that I made out of brown paper supermarket bags. So we get all the way back, and this is 1.14 million brown paper supermarket bags, which is the number of brown paper supermarket bags we use in the United States every hour. And this is the interesting thing about these issues, is that there's nowhere you can go and see all the brown paper supermarket bags we use, or all the laptop computers we throw out, or all the cell phones we throw out, or all of the mercury that goes into our oceans, or all the carbon that goes into the atmosphere. There's nowhere you can go and perceive those problems with our senses. There's no Mount Everest of our garbage that we can go and stand in front of and go, oh my God. And so what we're stuck with is these numbers, these incomprehensibly huge numbers that are in the billions or the hundreds of billions. And lately, we're starting to talk about trillions of dollars being spent on things. And these numbers are far beyond the ability of our mind to comprehend. And yet that's the only information we've got to try to face and comprehend these issues. So there's a disconnect, which I'm interested in trying to bridge if I can. So a bunch of plastic cups. This is an illustration I made of the number of plastic cups that are used on airline flights. So I took one picture of a plastic cup and just trimmed off the lip of the cup and stacked it in Photoshop and just built and built and built and started pasting cups in all kinds of configurations there in a way that hopefully looks like a kind of factory, like a chemical factory or something like that. And when you get all the way back, there it is. This is 1 million plastic cups, which is the number of plastic cups used on airline flights in the United States every 6 hours. So it takes 4 of this image to show just the plastic cups that we consume on airline flights every day in the United States. Plastic bottles. Here's, this is another large-scale image. We're zoomed way in to lots of plastic bottles, and we zoom a little bit further back. You see more and more of them, and finally we get back to an image that hopefully looks sort of like the ocean. This is 2 million plastic bottles, which is 5 minutes of our plastic bottle consumption in the United States. And one of the things I'm interested in, like when you begin to comprehend the enormity of these problems, my experience of it is I feel smaller and smaller, and less like I can make any difference. And I think that's a common phenomenon, is like when you really begin to understand the number 1 over 7 billion, one person, one little person over 7 billion, that's a really, really tiny number. And I know a lot of us have this sense that if I try to do something good, there are hundreds of millions of people out there who aren't. Or if I do something bad, I should just say, heck with it. I'm just going to use plastic like crazy and eat seafood like crazy and not worry about it. It's not going to make a difference. Like, I'm not going to be the person that either destroys the world or saves it. I'm too small to make a difference. I hear this so often everywhere I go, just this sense of I'm too small to make a difference. And when you stand back from a collective, like lots and lots of plastic bottles or lots and lots of people, we have this sense of being so small. And yet, somehow, collectively, humanity has created the problems that we have. So somehow we all do individually make a difference. I worked with an artist named Rebecca Clark, who did these beautiful hand drawings of birds, and I copied them and pasted them and created this gigantic canvas of 183,000 birds, which is the number of birds, the estimated number of birds that die in the United States every day from exposure to agricultural pesticides on commercial crops. So now let's get to the oceans. You probably know this famous painting by Botticelli. This is The Birth of Venus. So Venus is the goddess of love, but she's not the goddess of sexual or erotic love. That's Aphrodite. up here who's hanging out with her boyfriend Zephyr. Venus is the goddess of earthly love, our love for our mother. And the story of Venus is that she was born from the sea as a fully grown woman. So Venus's mother is the ocean. And so this was Botticelli's very clever way of reminding us to love the ocean. And so I thought this would be an interesting piece to make out of lots and lots of something that gets into our oceans, which is plastic bags. So the actual piece it's not quite as big as this screen, but almost, made out of 240,000 plastic bags, which is 10 seconds of our plastic bag consumption around the world. So we're going to zoom in, get closer and closer to Venus, and you see that she's made entirely out of plastic bags. And I filled one plastic bag with water and photographed it and put it right there as a tear of sadness in Venus's eye. And here's a piece that I made directly out of ocean plastic. This plastic came from the laboratory of Captain Charles Moore down in Long Beach. And he collected all this plastic in the Pacific Ocean, and he sent me a lot of it, and I photographed it and built this large-scale image of ocean plastic. So we're slowly zooming further and further back, and you can see the kind of plastic that appears in the ocean. There's bottle caps and combs and lots of individual shards, pieces of fishing line, flip-flop sandal up near the top there. Finally, we get all the way back, and you see it's Hokusai's famous work of art called The Great Wave off Kanagawa. And Hokusai, it's probably the most famous piece of art in Japan, and it's a really clever yin-yang symbol. So the wave and the negative space of the wave create the yin-yang symbol. And Hokusai, he was raising a couple of yin-yang relationships, and one of them is the stillness of the land. This is Mount Fuji, the stillness of the land and the great moving power of the oceans. And so I thought it'd be interesting to flip that yin-yang relationship on its head and show the great power of man to affect our oceans. So this is 2.4 million pieces of plastic, which is 1/25,000th of the estimate of the number of pieces of visible floating plastic in the world's oceans. And unfortunately, it's not a very effective piece because we can't comprehend 1/25,000th. If you could line up 25,000 of these, it would be miles and miles and miles long. So that work was all conceptual art, but I'm a photographer. I want to take photographs of things in the real world. And as I was studying what we call the Pacific Garbage Patch and learning about ocean plastic pollution, I attended meetings of scientists and would always be frustrated when they would say, you can't photograph the Pacific Garbage Patch. The plastic is spread out over thousands and thousands of miles of ocean. It's tiny pieces of plastic, and they're down in the water column. They don't bob on the surface like a cork. And there's not like an island of plastic the way people think. There's no way to photograph the Pacific Garbage Patch. And I was at a meeting of a group of scientists, and I heard that, and I slapped my knee, and I said, God, I'm a photographer. I want to take a photograph of the Pacific Garbage Patch. And a young woman who's an activist named Anna Cummins, who was sitting next to me, turned to me, and she said, if you want to take a photograph of the Pacific Garbage Patch, go to Midway Island and look inside the stomachs of dead baby albatrosses. And that just rang the temple bell for me. And she showed me some photographs that were already up on the internet of birds on this incredibly remote island in the very, very middle of the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean is the world's largest ocean by far. It's 6,000 miles wide, and it takes up 1/4 of the Earth's surface. Next time you get to see a globe, just turn it and look at how huge the Pacific Ocean is. It's astonishing. And in the very middle, halfway between Asia and the United States, Australia is 5,000 miles down this way, is a tiny island called Midway. And it is the home of the Laysan albatross. There are 1 million Laysan albatrosses that live on this island, and they range out over the entire Pacific to collect food to feed their babies.
Do we have the courage to face the realities of our time and allow ourselves to feel deeply enough that it transforms us and our future? Come with me on a journey through the eye of beauty. Across an ocean of grief. And beyond.
To face these issues, because when we face those issues, we can't help but feel something. And to me, that's the disconnect that's happened in our world, in what we call first world culture, is we've lost contact with what we feel. And our feelings are our connection with the world. If we see something happening and we feel something, then we're connected with that thing, whatever it is. And if we see something happening and we don't feel anything, then we're not connected with that thing. And if that thing is an atrocity, it can keep right on going and we don't intervene. It takes courage to feel the rage and the anger that I know that we all carry for what's being done to our world that we can't control. And it takes courage to feel our anxiety and our fear for what we see coming. But I think it takes the most courage of all to feel grief, to grieve what is being lost. Because when I was young, I was taught that all those feelings are bad. If you're angry, if you feel rage, if you feel anxiety, if you're scared, if you feel sad, that's somehow bad. Those are bad feelings, and I got to get over it. And my friend Paul Hawkins says, if you're not feeling all of those things every day, you're not paying attention. But grief in particular, I've come to think of grief as being a doorway that for my whole life, I always thought that if you grieve, that's the same as sadness. It's the same as despair. And looking out at the smorgasbord of horrors that we face in our world right now, including the multi-leveled, multi-scalar, multi-dimensional destruction of our oceans that's happening right now, to allow oneself to grieve that, it just seems like we're going to go down a hellhole of despair and hopelessness and paralysis that will last forever. I mean, if you really face just the extinctions that are going on in our oceans right now, if you really face it, it's so sad, it just feels like you're going to be sad forever. And this is something that I learned when I was on Midway, is about the nature of grief, at least for myself. I came to understand that grief is not the same as sadness. Grief is the same as love. Grief is the sibling or the mirror image of love. And any one of you who has lost someone or something that you love know that when you grieve that loss, you really feel how much you love that person or that thing. And so in turning away from our sadness for what's happening to the world, collectively, we turn away from our sadness. We live in fear of sadness. We're grief averse. In turning away from our sadness, we're turning away from our love. And the invitation that I'm trying to make with my work, especially with my Midway film, is not to turn away from grief, but to dive all the way into it. And in that process, we reconnect. We remember something that we have forgotten, which is that we love our world. I didn't know I loved the albatross. I didn't know there was a special place in my heart that was reserved for just my love for the albatross. I believe we all have that. I think love for the incomprehensibly beautiful miracle of our world and for the gift of life that each one of us has been given, that feeling of love, it's our fundamental state of being. It's not something we have to go out there and find. It's right here all the time. It's just been covered over with all the rushing around. The albatrosses on Midway Island have no fear of humans. They've been living there for 4 million years, and they've never had a predator, and so they're not afraid of us. And they're so thick on the ground. A million of them live on this tiny island, and you have to carefully weave your way in between them as you walk. And they don't run away and fly away the way all creatures do virtually everywhere else on Earth. And in fact, not only are they not afraid of us, but they're actually curious. They come toward us. And it's a fascinating experience to have a creature from another species show curiosity, because it reminds us we're so divided. Like, curiosity is a really interesting thing. I think curiosity might be the deepest of all human instincts, and maybe the deepest of all instincts of any creature. But it's fragile. The littlest bit of fear. Think if you're scared of that thing, then, whoa, sorry, no, I'm not curious after all. And we humans, we're so divided from each other in so many different ways. There's so much fear. And what if collectively we could contain that fear? Say, yeah, I'm scared of other people. Yes, we're scared of the people who look different from us. And contain that fear and remember our curiosity. Let us have the courage to feel our anger and our rage and our anxiety and our fear and our grief and our love, for our own healing and for the healing of our earth and for the oceans. Thank you.